Silence is not peace. It is the quiet before the storm of long-awaited retribution. Follow the gripping paths of those who came back from the shadows to balance the scales of justice forever. Hit subscribe now and watch the inevitable consequences of the past unfold. The morning my brother walked me out of my own mother's house, I didn't cry. I just stood on the porch with a cardboard box in my arms and watched him change the locks. That was 11 months ago, and for 11 months, I told myself to be patient. I was 32 years old, working as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, and living in a rented studio apartment that cost me $900 a month, money I didn't have, while my brother lived rent-free in the 4-bedroom house our mother had spent 40 years paying off. My name is Claire. My brother's name is Derek. And everything that happened between us started the way most family disasters do, quietly, over a long period of time, until one morning you realize the water has been boiling and you've been sitting in it the whole time. Our mother had a stroke in February of the year before last. She didn't die, not right away, but she lost most of her speech and her ability to manage her own finances. She needed full-time care. Derek, who hadn't held a steady job in 6 years and lived 2 miles from her house, stepped in immediately. He told me he would handle everything. He told me to focus on my career. He told me Mom was in good hands. I believed him. That was my first mistake. For 8 months, I drove down from Columbus every other weekend. I brought groceries, I sat with Mom, I read to her from the mystery novels she loved. Derek was always there, always friendly, always steering me away from the paperwork. "I've got it handled, Claire," he would say, smiling the way he always smiled, wide and easy, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the one being unreasonable for asking. Mom passed in October. Peacefully, the hospice nurse said, in her own bed. I was grateful for that much. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I drove down the night before and stayed in a hotel because Derek had already rented out Mom's guest room to a friend of his. I didn't say anything about it. I just paid for my own room and told myself it was temporary. The attorney's office was downtown, a glass building on 4th Street. I had never met the attorney before. A man named Gary, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who kept a law degree and a golf trophy on the same shelf. He had been Mom's attorney for 15 years, Derek told me. Handled everything. I arrived 10 minutes early. Derek was already there, sitting across from Gary's desk with his girlfriend, a woman named Renee, who had a way of looking at you like she was calculating something. They both smiled when I came in. I sat down. Gary opened a folder. And then he started reading. The will left the house to Derek outright. It left the car to Derek. It established a discretionary trust, meaning Derek controlled the distributions funded with the entire liquid estate, which Gary estimated at around $240,000. I was listed as a beneficiary of the trust, but only at Derek's discretion, which meant in practice, only if Derek decided to give me anything. I sat very still while Gary read. I kept my face neutral. I was a forensic accountant. I had spent 10 years reading financial documents that were designed to obscure what was actually happening. And what was actually happening, I knew, was that my brother had somehow convinced my mother, a woman who had always insisted on fairness, who had told both of us since we were children that she loved us equally, to sign over everything to him alone. I asked Gary a simple question when he finished. I asked when the will had been updated. Gary looked at his file. He said the will had been revised 8 months ago, 2 months after Mom's stroke. I nodded slowly. I said, "Thank you." I stood up. I shook Gary's hand. I shook Derek's hand. I smiled at Renee. I walked out. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for 4 minutes and breathed. Then I drove to the house. I had a key. I had always had a key. Derek hadn't changed those locks yet that came later. I let myself in through the side door, the one that led into the mudroom, and I stood in the kitchen that smelled like my mother, like lavender dish soap and strong coffee, and I let myself feel it for exactly 60 seconds. Then I started looking. I didn't touch anything Derek would notice. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I was just looking the way I always looked at financial situations that didn't add up, methodically, with the assumption that the anomaly exists somewhere and your job is to find it. I found the first anomaly in the recycling bin under the kitchen desk. It was a credit card statement, addressed to my mother, for an account I'd never seen before. The billing period was July through August. The balance was $41,000. The charges were almost entirely at a home improvement supplier, a landscaping company, and 3 transactions at a jewelry store in Easton. I photographed it with my phone. Then I found the second anomaly in the drawer beside the refrigerator, the shallow drawer where Mom always kept takeout menus and expired coupons. Buried under a stack of pizza flyers was a document I recognized immediately, a durable power of attorney, signed by my mother, naming Derek as her agent. It was dated 6 weeks after her stroke. I photographed that too. I left before Derek came home. That night, in my hotel room, I sat cross-legged on the bed with my laptop and my phone and a legal pad, and I started building a picture. It was what I did for a living. I reconstructed financial timelines. I found where money had gone and why and who had made it go there. I was good at it. I was, according to my supervisor, one of the best in the office. And what I was looking at now, if I was reading it correctly, was evidence that my brother had used a power of attorney signed by a woman recovering from a stroke, a woman who had limited cognitive function and no independent counsel to access her finances, run up debt in her name, and potentially influence a will revision. I called a friend of mine the next morning. Her name is Sandra, and she works in elder law. I didn't tell her it was about my own family. I described the situation hypothetically, the way lawyers and accountants often do when they're feeling something out. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The question isn't just whether the will can be contested. The question is whether the POA was executed properly. If your hypothetical person lacked capacity at the time of signing, the POA may be invalid. And if the POA is invalid, any financial transactions conducted under it may be void." I thanked her. I hung up. I wrote the word capacity in large letters on my legal pad and circled it 3 times. The problem was that I couldn't prove capacity, or the lack of it, alone. I needed the medical records from the period immediately following Mom's stroke. I needed documentation of her cognitive state. I needed someone who had been there, who had treated her, who could speak to what she was or was not able to understand at the time she signed those documents. I started with the hospice organization. They referred me to the hospital. The hospital referred me to the attending physician. I left a voicemail. I sent a letter. I followed up twice. 3 weeks passed. I was beginning to wonder if I was going to have to file a formal legal action just to get anyone to talk to me. Then something happened that I hadn't planned for. I was walking to the county courthouse on a Thursday morning in January. I was going to pull property transfer records, public documents, nothing dramatic. It was 8:40 in the morning, and the sidewalk had iced over in patches from freezing rain the night before. Ahead of me, an elderly man in a motorized wheelchair was navigating the uneven sidewalk alone. He was perhaps 75, slight, with white hair and a camel-colored overcoat that had seen better years. One of his front wheels had caught in a crack in the pavement, and the chair was listing at an angle. He was pushing the joystick with increasing urgency and not going anywhere. I could have walked past. I had a lot on my mind. I stopped instead. I crouched down, worked his wheel free from the crack, made sure he was stable. I asked if he was all right. He said he was fine, just embarrassed, and that he hated that particular block. I asked him where he was headed. He said the courthouse. I said that was where I was going too. He introduced himself as Walter. He didn't offer a last name, and I didn't ask. We walked, or rather, I walked, and he rolled in companionable silence for a block. Then he asked what brought me to the courthouse, and something about him, the directness of the question, the steadiness of his eyes made me answer honestly. I told him about my mother, about the will, about the credit card statement, and the power of attorney. I told him about the 8 months I'd spent trying to piece it together while working full-time and living out of a hotel on weekends. I told him about Sandra's assessment of the capacity question. I wasn't sure why I was telling a stranger all of this. Maybe because I had been carrying it alone for 3 months, and I was tired. Walter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a few steps. Then he said, "Do you have an attorney?" I said I had consulted one briefly, but couldn't afford to retain someone for what could become a lengthy probate dispute. He said, "The capacity evaluation, did the hospital ever get back to you?" I said not yet. He nodded slowly. He said, "There are pro bono elder law clinics through the County Bar Association. Have you looked into those?" I said I hadn't known about them. We reached the courthouse. I held the door. He thanked me. Inside, we went to different floors. I didn't think much more about it, just a kind old man with useful information. I went and pulled my records. The call came 4 days later. I didn't recognize the number. When I answered, a woman identified herself as the assistant to someone named Walter Greer, and she asked if I was available to come in for a meeting. I said I was sorry. I didn't know a Walter Greer. She said, "He said you helped him on the sidewalk outside the Franklin County Courthouse last Thursday." I was quiet for a moment. She told me that Walter Greer was a retired judge. He had served 22 years on the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, including 11 years presiding over probate cases. He was currently a senior advisor to the Ohio State Bar Association's Elder Law Division. He had, she said, reviewed the situation I described, consulted with 2 colleagues in probate law, and identified what he believed were several significant issues worth examining. He was not offering to represent me, he was retired, but he had agreed to connect me with an attorney who handled contested wills and elder financial abuse on a contingency basis. I sat down on the edge of my hotel bed. I said, "Why would he do that?" She paused. Then she said simply, "He said you didn't walk past." The attorney's name was Patricia. She was 48, matter of fact, and had the energy of someone who found this type of case personally offensive. When I met with her the following week and laid out everything I had, she was quiet for a long time, reading through my documentation. Then she looked up and said, "This is more than a will contest. This is elder financial abuse. Those are 2 different legal tracks, and we can run both." She explained what that meant. The will contest would challenge the validity of the revised document on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The financial abuse track would target the transactions conducted under the potentially invalid power of attorney, the credit card charges, and whatever else we could uncover. She asked if I had access to any of Mom's bank account records from the 8 months in question. I told her I had something better. 3 weeks earlier, I had remembered something. When Mom first got sick, before Derek took over completely, she and I had set up a shared cloud backup for her important documents. She'd been nervous about losing things. It had been my idea, I was always the organized one, and we'd linked it to an email address that neither of us used for anything else. I still had the password. I'd written it down in a notebook, the way I wrote down everything. I logged in from my laptop that night in Patricia's office conference room, and what was in that backup folder was 3 years of financial statements, tax documents, and most importantly, 18 months of bank records ending just before the cloud backup had stopped syncing, which appeared to be around the same time Derek took over management of her affairs. Patricia and I sat together until almost 9 o'clock that night going through them. The pattern was clear. Starting 2 months after Mom's stroke, the same month the POA was signed, there were regular transfers out of Mom's checking account into an account I didn't recognize, 12 of them, over 6 months. They totaled just over $90,000. Patricia wrote down a number on her legal pad. She circled it. She pushed it across the table toward me without saying anything. I looked at it. I already knew. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. It was held not in a courtroom but in a conference room at Patricia's firm. A round table, neutral ground, the kind of setting designed to encourage resolution without the formality of testimony. Derek would be there with his attorney, a man named Curtis who had a reputation for aggressive delay tactics. Gary, the estate attorney, had been subpoenaed to appear and provide documentation. I had learned through discovery that Gary had also prepared the revised will. He had gone to my mother's house to execute it. He had brought one witness, a neighbor, an older woman, who later told our investigator she hadn't really understood what she was signing as a witness and thought it was just a general document. I wore a gray blazer. I arrived 15 minutes early. Derek arrived with Curtis and with Renee, though Renee wasn't permitted in the room. She sat in the lobby. As Derek walked past me to take his seat, he gave me the same easy smile he always gave me. "Claire," he said pleasantly, as though we were at a family dinner. I said hello. Patricia had asked me not to speak unless directly addressed. She said she would handle it. I was fine with that. The mediator opened the session. Patricia provided a summary of our position. Curtis objected to the characterization on 3 separate occasions within the first 8 minutes, which the mediator gently overruled each time. Derek sat with his arms crossed, the smile slightly reduced now, but still in place. Then Patricia placed a set of documents in the center of the table. She explained what they were: the bank records, the transaction history, the credit card statements, and a medical evaluation she had obtained from the hospital, a neuropsychological assessment conducted 5 weeks after Mom's stroke, which documented significant short-term memory impairment and noted explicitly that the patient was not considered competent to execute legal or financial documents without additional assessment. That assessment had been conducted 2 weeks before the power of attorney was signed. The room was quiet. Derek's smile, for the first time in my memory, went away completely. Curtis leaned over and spoke quietly to Derek. Derek shook his head. Curtis spoke again, more quietly. Derek looked at the documents. He looked at Gary, who was sitting against the wall and had gone the color of old paper. Patricia said calmly, "We are also prepared to refer the financial transaction evidence to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for review under Ohio's elder abuse statutes. However, our client's preference is to resolve this matter here." Curtis asked for a recess. We took a 15-minute break. I stood in the hallway with Patricia and drank a cup of water and didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. We had been through the numbers enough times that there was nothing left to say. When we went back in, Curtis made a settlement offer. It was low, insultingly low, but it was the first number they had put on the table, which meant the smile was gone for good. Patricia countered. They went back and forth twice. Then Curtis asked for another recess and went to make a phone call. When he came back, he and Derek had a short, tense exchange that I could not quite hear, but could read clearly in Derek's face. The tightening of his jaw, the way he stopped looking at me entirely and stared at the table instead. Curtis put forward a new number. Patricia looked at me. I nodded once. The agreement was signed by 4 in the afternoon. I won't say the exact amount, because Patricia advised against it, and I think that's wise. What I will say is this. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split evenly. The trust would be dissolved, and the remaining funds distributed equally. Derek retained no discretionary control. Gary agreed to cooperate with the County Bar Association's inquiry into his conduct in executing the revised will. I walked out of that conference room at 4:17 in the afternoon and sat on a bench in the lobby while Patricia spoke with the mediator about filing the agreement. Renee was still in the lobby. She looked at my face, and whatever she saw there made her stand up and go outside. Derek came out a few minutes later. He stopped when he saw me. He didn't smile this time. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Something between anger and recognition, like a man who has been caught in a story he told himself for too long. He said, "You always had to make everything complicated." I thought about my mother's lavender dish soap. I thought about reading mystery novels to her on Sunday afternoons. I thought about $41,000 charged on a credit card in her name while she was still learning to speak again. I said goodbye, Derek. He left. I sat on that bench for a few more minutes. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting in the quiet of it, the way you sit, after you've finished something that took a very long time. Patricia came out and sat next to me and asked if I was all right. I told her I was. She said, "Walter's going to want to hear how this went." I said I knew. I said I was going to bring him coffee and one of those lemon pound cake slices from the bakery on 4th Street, because that was apparently his favorite, according to his assistant. And it seemed like the least I could do for a man I'd helped with a stuck wheelchair wheel on a frozen sidewalk. Patricia laughed. She said, "You know he spent 3 hours on the phone with 2 different colleagues the day after you met him. He said he hadn't seen a cleaner paper trail in a contested estate case in 15 years. I thought about that for a moment. There's something I've learned in 10 years of forensic accounting, and it's this. Most people who steal from someone they love do it gradually, and they do it by making you feel like you're the one who's being unreasonable for noticing. They count on the fact that you'll feel guilty for looking too closely. They count on the fact that love and suspicion feel, from the inside, very similar, and that most people choose to call it love because it's more comfortable. I chose to look closely. I chose to be uncomfortable. And I chose not to walk past an old man with a stuck wheelchair on a frozen sidewalk, which turned out to be the most important thing I did all year, not because of who he was, but because of what it is to be the kind of person who stops. My mother always said that. She said it in different words. She'd say, "People will show you who they are in the small moments, not the big ones." She said it so often I stopped hearing it, the way you stop hearing things that are true and close to you. I hear it now. The house sold in May. It was a clean sale, quick, a young couple who wanted a yard for their kids. I drove by on the last day of escrow, not to see the house, but just to drive through that neighborhood one more time, past the corner store where Mom used to send us for milk, past the elementary school with the new paint on the fence, past the lives that go on in places where other lives happened. I didn't stop. I drove back to Columbus with the windows down. It was a warm evening, the kind of evening that doesn't require explanation. And if there's a reason I'm telling you this, it's not because I won. It's because for a long time I thought the only choices were to fight or to let it go. And it took me almost a year to understand that there is a third option, which is to be methodical, to be patient, and to trust that the truth is findable if you're willing to do the work of finding it. It always leaves a paper trail. You just have to know where to look.